Welcome into press coverage. Dan Hope joined by Andy Anders at the start of a big week for Ohio State football as the Buckeyes will get back on the field this week for their first practices of preseason camp. That starts Thursday morning at 8:30 a.m. Andy and I and the rest of the 11 Warriors crew will be out there on Thursday morning. We'll have more later in the week previewing fall camp, but wanted to kind of wrap up some of the stuff from Big Ten Media Days last week. We talked on here last week about some of the Ohio State storylines coming out of Big Ten Media Days, but hadn't had a chance yet with, leaving Las Vegas right after the last day of interviews, traveling back to Columbus to talk about some of the other storylines around the Big Ten. And of course, the one that always draws attention when you're Ohio State is Michigan. And Michigan speaking on the last day of Big Ten Media Days. And Andy, you were there for what I think was probably the most viral moment, the most memorable moment from those interviews when you were talking to Derrick Moore about how he felt about Ohio State's national championship run last year.
Yeah, said that, it's not a real win if you don't beat us being Michigan, from his perspective, of course. And, it was an interesting comp because this interview was kind of like there were three of us Ohio State reporters that were asking questions, and you're kind of bouncing off, looking for a lot of times guys are going to play it coy, play it a little more, um, downplay it a little more in terms of just not giving that bulletin board material, right? And you kind of finally got there with Derrick Moore in this interview a little bit. I was a little surprised he said it, but it's that kind of rivalry trash talk that has always made this rivalry great in some respects. I think it was a little bit weird because he started by congratulating on Ohio State for the win, but then said, "But it's not a real win because you didn't beat us." And I think while there are some Ohio State fans that might feel, the national title isn't as complete without that Michigan victory, I think to say it's not a real win, you look at the gauntlet of teams Ohio State beat. That's the obvious comeback that a lot of people have had to that statement from Derrick Moore. Which the other thing that was interesting, earlier in that interview, he was talking about how he's come out of his shell a lot more and he didn't used to enjoy these kinds of settings. Well, that was a big piece of trash talk to unleash. You can say he's completely come out of his shell on that, I guess.
Yeah, and I think, I agree with you that I think, for Ohio State to do what it did, to come back from that loss, to beat Tennessee, to beat Oregon, to beat Texas, to beat Notre Dame, there's no reason for there to be any kind of asterisk or qualification on Ohio State's national championship. Now, with that being said, for Ohio State to have a complete season, a perfect season, whatever you want to call it, you got to beat Michigan. That's just how big that rivalry is. So, if we were to compare, Ohio State's, 2024 national championship season with past national championship seasons like 2002 and 2014, you're probably putting 2024 behind those seasons because of the fact that Ohio State didn't beat Michigan, which it did in those past years. But, it's kind of like, I saw some, fans kind of giving the response of, in the NFL, if you lose to your rival during a regular season and go on to win the Super Bowl, does anyone say it's not a real championship? No. Now, college football is a little bit different. Rivalries are bigger in college football than they are in any other sport. But still, it's in this new world of college football. If you make this 12-team college football playoff, you're going to have to win at least 3, if not 4, like Ohio State did, games every year. You get through that gauntlet, you're a legitimate national champion no matter what.
I completely agree with you, Dan, and the fans who have pointed that out. And I think it's interesting. Derrick Moore pointed out that Michigan sort of helped Ohio State along the way, and it was a galvanizing force, I think, for the team to lose that game. But you can't deny, I mean, you beat the number 1, number 3, number 5, and number 7 teams in the final CFP selection committee poll there on that playoff gauntlet. And to call it an easy little run as Derrick Moore did, I just a quote that to me seems pretty out of left field there, even more so than the "it's not a real win." Like how serious that rivalry is. I don't want to diminish that rivalry at all. Obviously, we know how huge it is for both of these fan bases, but to in some way try to devalue that national title for Ohio State from the Michigan side, I think you can understand why it got a lot of people riled up. And then I think the flip side of that too for a lot of Ohio State fans is, hey, you've got these sanctions that are coming down the barrel from some shady, underhanded ways that maybe helped you win your national title, or at least get you to that echelon before Connor Stallions was ultimately removed from the staff there during that 2023 run for Michigan. And that's something we could get some news on very soon here, Dan.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like things are heading toward a resolution there soon. I know that, some people in our message board have, been floating the possibility of it could come as soon as this week. And so we will see if that happens. Nothing confirmed yet as of Monday morning, but it certainly seems like that's coming sooner than later. I mean, it should be coming sooner than later. It's been almost 2 years at this point. The season starts in a month. So this isn't something that if you're the NCAA, if you're any party involved in this, that you want to drag out into the season. And so we will see, if some news comes this week before camp starts around the nation. Certainly, Tony Petitti mentioned last week that, he felt that one of the big priorities for college football as they move into this new model, with the College Sports Commission overseeing enforcement on revenue sharing and NIL, all of that, is for these infraction processes to be sped up. When Sharon Moore was asked about it at Media Days, he did not want to talk about it, but certainly I think there's a push from the Big Ten to get this resolved and get that to the finish line. And certainly, if we do get news on that, we'll be back with another video, a lot more content on that, because it's certainly going to be a massive storyline, one way or the other, whether Michigan gets heavy punishments or whether they get a slap on the wrist. Either way, it's going to be big news. We certainly know which side of that equation Ohio State fans are hoping for. And we will see if that ultimately comes to pass this week. Going back to the bulletin board material, Sharon Moore certainly didn't want to give Ohio State any bulletin board material. When he was asked about the Derrick Moore comment, made a comment about, trying to clickbait the players, which if you are an Ohio State player, Michigan, Ohio State, Michigan coach, whatever, you got to know going into Big Ten Media Days, you are going to get asked about your rival. Every Ryan Day and every Ohio State player got asked about Michigan. Sharon Moore, every Michigan player got asked about Ohio State. I thought, Ryan Day had probably one of the funnier answers along that when he was asked, how do you beat Michigan? And he just said, by scoring more points than them, which that's not usually how you don't usually see Ryan Day answer a question like that. But that kind of just tells you, where Ryan Day's head is at in terms of not wanting to get involved in any more rivalry banter. With the way last year went, losing to Michigan and going home with a national championship, there's no advantage for Ryan Day to get involved in any of that, at least not until November comes around. Sharon Moore taking the same approach when he was asked about the national championship. He basically just said, yeah, they won it. They were the best team. Kudos to them. Also, really praised Jeremiah Smith when he was asked about Jeremiah Smith, said he's probably the best player in college football, which I think speaks to just how good Jeremiah Smith is. The guy is so good that even their most bitter rival can't help but acknowledge the fact that he's the best player in college football.
Yeah, and just a peek behind the curtain, of course. Yeah, I clickbaiting the players that is a big part of just not only the rivalry trash talk, but covering it as a reporter, right? If someone says something, I think I heard that quote, and I was immediately, a peek behind the curtain here for people. I was immediately running back like, okay, I'm going to write that story right now, because you know how much attention it's going to get. And that's not to say I'm here to clickbait somebody. I'm here to completely just like look for an insidious quote and run it out of context. But that it's again the fun of the rivalry is the trash talk, the back and forth, the banter of it all. And I think being a part of that was kind of a fun experience for me. And I know some people might see it a certain way, but I enjoyed that moment of just how intense the rivalry can be. Someone says something like that almost seems completely out of left field and out of pocket to say that it's not a real win because you didn't win this one rivalry game. And then all the reaction it gets and the back and forth that happens. Don't like it when people take it to an extreme, per se, and there's some nasty things said by sometimes, but I enjoy the back and forth of the rivalry, the banter of it, and it's part of this job to cover that, to you know clickbait the players sometimes, if that's how you want to put it so bluntly. If you're
Well,
Jerome
you
Moore,
asked him a question, he answered the question. Like it's
exactly.
not, clickbait is when you take something out of context and spin it in a way that's not accurate to what the person said. He said what he said. He could have just stopped to congratulating him. He decided to say it's not no real title if you don't beat us. So, so that's that one. As soon as he said that, it was going to go all over the internet. So that's just the way it goes. I mean, you say
Yeah.
these things are in a public setting, and it's the way it is now. That maybe back 30 years ago or whatever, you could say something at one of these events, and it just ends up in some newspaper stories. Nowadays, you say anything controversial at a media day type event, it is going to be all over the internet within minutes. That's just the way it goes.
So there's that rivalry talk. Obviously, all that bitterness between Ohio State, Michigan, but Dan, I think there's an evolving bromance in the coaching ranks. I think Ryan Day and Dan Lanning, the things those two said about each other at Big Ten Media Days, and the mutual respect, the admiration between Ohio State and Oregon, it seems like just a wonderful blossoming friendship between those two elite coaches, elite at what they do, and getting to bounce some ideas off of each other. It seems a lot of this was spurred on by a golf trip that the two took together. Um, the name of the trip escapes me at the moment. It was for Nike. They got together. Obviously, Ohio State and Oregon, both Nike schools. They got to play a round of golf together, spend some time together, bounce some ideas off of each other. I know Ryan Day has a lot of respect for how Dan Lanning supported his wife through her battle with osteosarcoma, which she has been cancer free here for 8 years now, which is amazing. But that story with Dan Lanning respects the way Ryan Day runs his program, supports his players, and there doesn't seem to be a bitterness from the Oregon side about what happened in the Rose Bowl. Motivation, yes. Fuel, yes. Oregon's players, Dan Lanning, they all talked about how that Rose Bowl loss has sort of fueled their offseason, having a perfect campaign up until that point, winning the Big Ten title, accomplishing everything else you wanted to do, except, then getting your doors kicked in that national playoff, that college football playoff quarterfinal, excuse me, at the Rose Bowl. But not a hatred or a bitterness, not a rivalry forming between Ohio State and Oregon. It seems Dan Lanning, Ryan Day, Ohio State, Oregon, a lot of respect, a lot of mutual admiration for each other, which was definitely a theme that ran contrary Wednesday to what we saw from the Michigan talk on Thursday.
To your point, about bitterness, I mean, Bryce Betcher admitted that, they were shocked by how that game went in the Rose Bowl. I mean, to beat Ohio State during regular season and be down 34-0 in the second quarter, it was certainly not the way anyone at Oregon expected that game to go, not even close to that. But, I think there was also a contrast maybe from what we heard from Tez Johnson back at the NFL Scouting Combine back in the spring, where he claimed that Oregon was the more talented team, and that Ohio State just beat Oregon because of its scheme. I think there was acceptance from the Oregon players at Big Ten Media Days this week. But, Ohio State was just a better team on that day. They just played better than the Ducks did on that day. And they won the game, and they were the team that deserved to win. And so that's certainly going to serve as fuel for the Ducks this season. Ohio State and Oregon not scheduled to play during the regular season, but we'll see if they end up crossing paths in the postseason again, whether that be in a Big Ten championship game, whether that be in the college football playoff. Certainly would be a fun matchup if we get to watch the Buckeyes and Ducks play each other again, especially with that budding bromance, as you talked about, between Ryan Day and Dan Lanning. The other team that I think is getting a lot of attention in the Big Ten championship race, Chase and I talked about that a little bit last week, is Penn State, the team that it has been picked as the preseason favorite to win the conference, a team that is viewed as a national championship contender going into the 2025 season. James Franklin and his players getting asked a lot about that in a way that honestly kind of reminded me of what it was like covering Ohio State at last year's Big Ten Media Days. Because last year at Big Ten Media Days, it was all about expectations and is this going to be the year? It was like everything was all setting up for last year to be the year for Ohio State to break through. And in the end, they ultimately did with that college football playoff run. Now, Penn State is being viewed very much through that same prism of you brought back all these key veterans, Drew Aller, Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, Denai Dennis Sutton, Zane Durant, Nick Dawkins. The list goes on. They have a very experienced and talented roster. They hired Jim Knowles away from Ohio State after Ohio State had the best defense in the country this year. It's a lot like Michigan 2 years ago and Ohio State last year, where it feels like an all-in kind of year for Penn State. And kind of like where Ohio State was at a year ago. You've got this one team in the conference that's been a monkey on your back. It was Michigan for Ohio State. It's Ohio State for Penn State. And this perception, which I think in James Franklin's case is much more actually true than it was for Ryan Day, that he does not win big games. I mean, you're talking about a guy who's 4-20 against top 10 opponents as Penn State's head coach. Can he get over that hump? Can Penn State get over that hump with all the returning talent that they have? I think on paper, you just look at the blueprint that was laid out for them by Michigan and Ohio State. I think this Penn State team is very capable of being that national championship caliber, Big Ten championship caliber kind of team. The big question, to me, there's two big questions. One is, can James Franklin get over the hump and win big games? And two, can Drew Aller take that next step? Can he be that guy who we've seen him? He's very talented quarterback, but he hasn't played his best in those big games. Can he elevate to that level where he's the guy leading Penn State to big wins? That's the whole question. I got the sense from talking to James Franklin and those players that, they are very confident going into this season. They always talk about that 1-0 mentality at Penn State, and they're still that way. They didn't really want to talk about Ohio State or things down the line. But I do think that while James Franklin said the expectations are not different this year than they've been in past years, the expectation is always to win Big Ten and national championships. I think there's a recognition throughout that program that with all the veterans who have come back, with the coaching staff they've assembled, this is supposed to be their year. What do you think, Andy? What do you think their chances are of actually doing it?
Yeah, I think Penn State's my national champion pick. I think you're in a similar boat with them and the talent, the roster they have assembled. To me, I've seen time and time again. I'm still fairly young watching football, 27. I've been a college football fan all my life, but things still happen all the time that surprise me. Narratives emerge and get broken that just it happens all the time. A guy can't win a big game until he does. Before Ryan Day, nationally it was Kirby Smart, and Kirby Smart all of a sudden won 2 national titles at Georgia. I think people forget that sports are sometimes this beautiful collection of, yes, you control a lot of the outcome, but there's some randomness involved. There's some um, barriers involved. Penn State, I think, not only is this the best roster that James Franklin has had, a lot of these years they were that borderline top 10 team. And you look at that record in top 10 games, it's bad. It's very bad. But at the same time, I think you they weren't necessarily the favorite in a lot of those games. They weren't the clear cut, like, these are games they should win per se. This collection of talent is on another level, I think. And if you do fail to achieve those goals with this roster as James Franklin, it is worth questioning whether you ever can. But to me, I think these narratives were made to be rewritten with any coach, with any player. I've been known as a Drew Aller detractor in the past. I'm going to say it now. I think he has a huge year. I think Drew Aller actually goes out and shows why he got all the hype he did as a recruit. Really, last year he put up great numbers. It's just that he struggled in the big games when it mattered most for Penn State. And so you just got to get that extra layer of mental fortitude, of performance, of reading a defense, whatever it is. I think Drew Aller knows what it is he has to address. You hear about his work ethic from his teammates. You hear about his drive to win. I really am high on Penn State this year. They're going to be my national title pick, and I might pick them depending on where it is in the season. There's a lot of football to be played. Picking the Ohio State-Texas game right now, Ohio State plays Texas week 1. There's not all this other information we're going to have on those two teams outside of what we get from preseason camp from both sides. Ohio State, Penn State, my pick might change by the middle of the season, depending on how those two teams look. But for me, if you were to ask me right now who am I picking in that game, I might very well pick Penn State. And I really just think that the big game James thing, it's fun to say. I've made fun of him in the past. He's made mistakes in big games for sure. But I think this is the year he can rewrite that narrative. I think they have the actual roster to do it.
Well, it would help if they can win some games that don't come down to the last possession, having to make a big call in the fourth quarter. Because that's been a lot of James Franklin's failings, is it's been a lot of those one-score games, kind of like last year. He goes for it on fourth down at the goal line against Ohio State. They get stopped, and that's what allowed Ohio State to win that game. So some of it is, needing to, take control of games, needing to not let games come down to those last possessions where, one mistake, one coaching call can turn the game in the other team's favor. But yeah, I agree with you. I'm high on Penn State this year. I probably still pick Ohio State to win that game at the Shoe in November, just because, it's been that, kind of boogeyman for Penn State of beating Ohio State, having to do it at the Shoe in front of what I think will be a very raucous crowd, a team that's going to want to make a statement against Jim Knowles. I said it when I did my preseason poll that I would pick Ohio State to beat Penn State in the regular season, but the two teams to rematch in the Big Ten championship game with Penn State winning. But there's going to be a lot of competition in Big Ten. I think probably one of my biggest overall takeaways just coming out of Big Ten Media Days is the fact that I think there's a lot of intriguing teams in the conference this year. We covering Ohio State, of course, focus primarily on Ohio State, and Oregon, Penn State, Michigan. Those are the teams that get the most attention outside of Ohio State. But you just look around the conference, you look at some of the players that were at Big Ten Media Days. I think there's a lot of intriguing teams in this conference. Illinois is a team that had a really good year, brings back most of their starters that we've talked about as a potential playoff sleeper. Indiana, you could argue Indiana has a better roster than it did last year when it went to the college football playoffs. So they're going to be an interesting team. Nebraska, you've got Dylan Raiola going into his second year. Can he make that jump, live up to his recruiting pedigree? If so, can Nebraska become a contender in the Big Ten? USC is a team that I feel like they're kind of on the back burner right now because they haven't done great under Lincoln Riley, but they still have some talent there. Can they get in the mix? Washington's a team that I've talked about is intriguing to me. Damon Williams, I think, is going to be a dynamic quarterback for them. Jonah Coleman, a really good running back. Denzel Boston, a really good wide receiver. They got some talented defensive players as well. So Washington's a team that intrigues me. UCLA, you got Nico Iamaleava. Obviously, we saw what happened to him in that college football playoff game against Ohio State last year when he was Tennessee's quarterback, but still one of the more talented quarterbacks in the country. Can he elevate UCLA? No, I mean, I'm not saying I think UCLA is going to become a Big Ten championship contender, but can he make UCLA a competitive team, a team that can contend against some of the top teams in the conference? I think it's a very interesting year across college football in general, because I think last year we kind of went into the year like Ohio State should be this super team. I don't think there is a team like that in college football this year, but I think there's a lot of teams that have the potential to be really good and put themselves into that college football playoff, even national championship conversation. So it's going to be a fun year ahead for Big Ten football, Andy. And I think we're both excited that we really get to start ramping up to the season this week with preseason camp.
Yeah, this is when the grind starts, especially as a reporter. Big Ten Media Days
and
is
as a
kind
player
of
and a coach.
and a player and a coach. Yes, obviously, preseason camp. But Big Ten Media Days it's just the kickoff, and a couple of coaches even mentioned that at Big Ten Media Days, having it in Vegas was such a unique experience, and it was my first time in Vegas, so even just walking the strip. But yeah, I am excited for the level of parity in the Big Ten this year, and you mentioned Nebraska, you mentioned Indiana, Illinois, another team you got to throw in there too with what they've got coming back. Luke Altmaier at quarterback. This is a league that I think is going to be really interesting in after Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State. Who is that fourth team that emerges with these rosters that are assembled? Who's that fourth team? Who's that fifth team? Who else is in the playoff conversation? This could be the last year of the 12-team playoff, right? But Big Ten could be in that again, could be in that conversation to get 4 teams in. It's a really deep league this year. I think that makes it extra exciting for Big Ten football. And that much was on display at Big Ten Media Days that, hey, this isn't just a top-heavy conference that's won the last 2 national titles. There's some real talent here, and it could be a really exciting year of Big Ten football.
Could be the last year of a 12-team playoff if the Big Ten and SEC can ever agree on a college football playoff format, which it's clear right now they are at odds. It's very clear. We talked about this a little bit less. It's very clear what the Big Ten wants. Tony Petitti did a great job getting his soldiers in line to bang the table very hard for that 4-4, 2-2-1. Basically, 4 automatic qualifiers, simple way to put it. That's the Big Ten wants 4 automatic qualifiers, and they want the SEC to play 9 conference games. We'll see if that ultimately happens, but we know what the Big Ten is pushing for, and we know that in just 3 days, we are going to see Ohio State football players on the field at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. So lots more coverage to come this week on 11warriors.com and 11 Warriors YouTube channel. For now, he's Andy Anders. I'm Dan Hope. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Press Coverage.